Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I phrased the question very carefully. So for the benefit of the tape, I recognise that there's the air quality improvements that you're driving for, but the question was specifically about the financial impact, and I did word that in the question. Just so you know, I spoke with TfL on Monday, and they're going to come back with some modelling about the air quality in Outer London. I want to do my homework, and I want to understand it. So it's the financial impact that I want to focus in. And the question asks, how will you ensure that the financial impact of these schemes does not hit the poorest the hardest?
Well, there'll be an integrated impact assessment which will look into the sort of issues we're talking about, the equality and economic impacts. And I can ask the TfL to also brief you on that as well. It's similar to the assessment we did, obviously a different area, in relation to both the central and inner London. ULEZ, looking into a whole host of issues which TfL can explain to you. And that's one of the reasons to address any adverse economic consequences, we would have the widest possible scrappage scheme, and why in my answer I asked for your help in relation to persuading the government not to treat London differently, not to be anti-London, and give us some of the support they give in other parts of the country to ameliorate some of the consequences economically to those who may suffer adversely because of ULEZ expanding.
So I'll advocate for my residents wherever that needs to happen. So around those financial impacts, residents have been in touch with me. This is a really big issue of concern for them, as it was when there was the extension to the North and South Circular that we talked about. They're really worried about how it's going to impact them visiting friends and family, getting to work. Small businesses that run maybe a fleet of diesel vehicles, they're concerned because the scrappage scheme ran out of money last time, so they're really concerned to make sure it doesn't happen this time. You mentioned, I think, into an answer to one of our colleagues here about half of Londoners not owning a car. Which half don't own a car?
So, on average, if you look at all of London, around half of Londoners don't own a car. And to give you credit, to be fair, the Conservatives have been consistently opposed to ULEZ, consistently opposed to Central London ULEZ. You've been opposed to in London ULEZ, and we're not surprised you're opposed to Outer London ULEZ as well. So you have been consistent. I'm quite clear in relation to Mike being consistently in favour of cleaning up the air in our city. It is an issue of social justice. Those in Outer London suffer more deaths caused by poor air quality. They're older Londoners, but also are more likely to have asthma than those in Central London.
Just because we're going into the polemic here. So the reason I asked about that, which half of London...
It's a fact.
No, well, it isn't. So which half of London? Camden, 34%
in Outer London, more people suffer adverse consequences from air quality.
I really worded the question carefully to ask about the financial impact in terms of the expanded zone.
Well, no, you said it wasn't a fact. It is a fact, though, isn't it? Do you accept now? Do you accept it is a fact? Those in Outer London suffer more consequences from air quality. It is a fact. Will you accept it as a fact?
Into Outer London.
So you said it wasn't a fact. It is a fact, though, isn't it?
When I asked about the question was which half...
It is a fact.
The question was which half...
It's Mayor's question time.
If we look to Camden, you're right, Camden, there's 34% car ownership. Hackney, there's 33% car ownership. Islington, there's 32% car ownership. You go to Outer London, Bexley, there's 74% car ownership. Bromley, there's 75% car ownership. 75% in Havering, 74% in Kingston upon Thames, 77% in Sutton. These are figures from the Centre of London report. So, you know, London is different, and that's in different parts of London, and that's a case that's been made over and over again. So when ULEZ expands out to cover the whole of London, it's not the case, which is the implied suggestion, that not many people out there own cars. It's different. There is a different makeup in Outer London to Inner London. Okay? That comes from these figures here. You said a couple of times now that, again, the poorest in London don't own cars. Where do you get that data from? Because I've been looking very carefully for that data.
Okay, you've had 3 minutes to ask your question. I will give you the courtesy to have at least 3 minutes to answer.
If you could ask the question I asked, that would be very useful.
So, one of the reasons why those in Outer London suffer worse in relation to the consequences of air quality is they're older, and as you said, there may be more air pollution caused by the numbers of cars there. On average, the car ownership in London is around half, and that's leading to the premature deaths I've been talking about. One of the reasons why we are increasing bus services in Outer London is because we want to improve public transport in Outer London, which for too long has benefited from less good public transport. One of the reasons, for example, we were keen to have step-free access in Harrow on the Hill was so that Outer London could have the benefits of people being able to use public transport. It is a fact, though, you may not like it, I don't like it, but Outer London suffers worse consequences from air pollution. We have more
Deputy
Outer Londoners.
Mayor, I put it right at the beginning of this, the caveat that this is separating air quality from financial impact.
I wasn't given 3 minutes.
No,
separating
to be fair, sorry, excuse me, to be fair, Mr Mayor, he's quite specific on his question. I think we've given you quite a lot of lenience in relation to talking about air quality, but you're talking about air quality, but the question is quite clear, and if you could either address your answer.
I'm happy to phrase the question again in case the Mayor
if you wouldn't
missed
mind,
it,
Assembly Member,
which is that you've said previously that the poorest in London do not own cars, and my question is, because I've looked through it, I'm trying to find that data, where do you source that data from?
So can I just be clear? So you're implying the poorest do own cars?
No, I'll ask again, just for your clarity. You've said many times that the poorest in London don't have cars. Implication being that when there's an expanded ULEZ zone, they won't be impacted by it in terms of the financial impact. I'm asking, I've gone to look for that data. I'm struggling to find that data. Where do you get that data from? Well, I want to understand your thinking.
I am surprised that the member's experience of being an elected politician doesn't lead him to conclude that the poorest Londoners can't afford to own cars. I will send him evidence backing up.
I'll go and get it myself. Where does it come from?
I will send him not just my own experience of this, but examples to show that nearly half all households in London.
I don't need examples. I think it's a clearly phrased and respectful question. Actually, I'm not disputing you. I'm asking you where you got that data from, so I can go and have a look at it myself.
I think, Mr Mayor, and I probably wouldn't expect you to know it off the top of your head, but he's asking for the source, Mr Mayor, asking for the source.
I was surprised by the proposition that poor people are less
you
likely to
made
own a
that
car.
proposition. I said that I didn't make that. I've asked you very clearly where you get your data from, so I can go and study it and have a look at it.
So I'm surprised by that supposition. I will make sure that officials in TfL give him the data. Maybe he should knock on a few more doors and get around London a bit more in relation to...
So what does that mean? You see, that was just a dig. That was a dig because you feel awkward. Now, if you don't have the data, you can tell me you don't have that to hand, and I will have it. But you don't need to make digs like that. It's unbecoming of the office. No, I've spoken with the ONS.
Johnson supporter.
See, again, unbecoming of the office. I asked a respectful question, and if you feel awkward...
Well, the Deputy Chair's going to give me a chance to respond. Give me a chance to respond,
then that's fine. You're not responding to the question I'm asking. So if you could send me... So you said over and over again that the poorest in London don't have cars, the suggestion and the implication being that when the ULEZ expands out, that they won't be impacted by it. So I'm saying, OK, let me see where that data is, because I'd quite like to see where you're setting the mark of poorest as well. So you've agreed to send me that data, and I look forward to receiving it. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
I look forward to many conversations to explain to the member about poverty and the link between poor households.
That's absurd, again, and frankly insulting and ignorant of my background, actually, Mr Mayor.
Right. I'm going to now call a halt to this, actually, and say that, Mr Mayor, if you can just be just a little bit more respectful of members, it would be greatly appreciated. I can understand where you're coming from, but also you have to understand where other people are coming from as well. So
I'm happy to take guidance from you how in a respectful way I can help the member have more experience of poor Londoners' experience.
Again, that's absolutely absurd and ignorant of my background, and you need to behave more in standing with your office.
Says a Boris Johnson supporting Tory member.
It's like a playground and a silly school bully.
I'm not going to allow this to decline into a playground, frankly. I think both members need to sort of heighten the level of debate here.
I think he's the member, I'm the mayor.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, you just have to stop making those little crypts. It doesn't become the office, it really doesn't. OK, so we're going to move now on to Assembly Member Cooper's question, which is 1059, which is about the London-wide ULEZ expansion.
Actually, Deputy Chair, I didn't...
Oh, I do apologise, yes. In all the excitement,
I know.
I overlooked the fact that I've got it written down here that you did ask a supplementary.
I did, thank you.
This is not your question, this is your supplementary on this.
Well, yes, I mean, I won't go back to exactly where we got to in that particular discussion, but I did wonder, you know, obviously one of the ways in which London has been treated unfairly compared to the rest of the country is we have a National Clean Air Fund, which has had a pretty paltry amount of money put into it by the government, in my view. And London, which I think we've all agreed that the measurement of London air is, that it is toxic, it is filthy, the gases, the particulate matter, it does need to be cleaned up. You've come forward with concrete proposals that actually build originally the first ULEZ on the suggestion from that bloke we were just talking about, the previous mayor. But of course, it is essential that the expansion of the ULEZ and what we're doing is fair to all Londoners in terms of, as much as possible, the financial side of things, which is what Assemblymember Fortune was raising, rather than just looking at the congestion or the health side of things. How important is it that we are given more support in London, like all the other parts of the country where they are trying to step up and tackle poor air? They are following in our wake, but they are being given more help than we are. Isn't that the case?
Yes, when you look at the clean air zones around the country, the government has provided support to Manchester, Birmingham, Bath, Bristol, Coventry, Bradford, Portsmouth, no support to London. And it is important London gets support. On the one hand, members from the Conservative Party claim to understand poverty but aren't willing to lobby their government for support towards a scrappage scheme. What I'd encourage them to do is, rather than posturing or cheap possible points, but to lobby the government for support towards a scrappage scheme. It's really important we receive support.
Mr Mayor, you put 61 million in total into the previous scrappage schemes in preparation for the October 21 expansion to the North and South Circular. How helpful would it really be if we are going to go ahead in 2023 with the expansion to the whole of Greater London to have that support for those very Londoners that Assemblymember Fortune was just referring to?
Well, I'm not sure who he was referring to be honest. But the £61 million from TfL, zero from the government. Zero. Took 15,500 cars, the most polluting cars, off our street. He's not met poorer Londoners, but I'm sure we can take him around some of our estates. To meet
that's a personal point of personal order, isn't it?
Don't own a vehicle, but suffering the worst.
What's the evidence? That's absurd.
I mean, I sat.
Sorry, Assemblymember Cooper, the member is asking for a point of personal explanation, which he's quite entitled to do, as he's been.
Sorry, he wasn't named.
No, it doesn't have to be named. It was a very. Sorry, excuse me. I'm chairing this meeting. It was very clear who the mayor was indicating to and was referring to. So, under the standing orders, the Assembly member has the right to a personal point of explanation. So, Assembly member Fortune.
The mayor has bizarrely referenced me a few times now, saying that I have no experience with the poorest Londoners. I'd like to know on what he bases that assertion.
Was that the explanation or a question?
I think that is a question.
Will that use up his time?
You can answer the question, or you can not answer the question.
No, I'm not going to bother.
Oh, how rude of you. Unbelievable.
Why are you not going to bother? You're scared, you're frit. Is that the problem?
Surely a point of personal explanation is for the Assembly member to explain himself.
Being accused of being a frit is not unbecoming of a member.
I'm actually quoting you back, funnily enough. Yeah. I remember you saying it to my colleague to my left. You can't keep going away with these bully boy tactics. It's unbecoming.